Hello, welcome back to H Hour. If you are listening to this or watching this after the recording date, which you probably are, then be aware that the questions I'm about to ask the guest, Tina Woods, have been selected by subscribers to the podcast. If you want a chance to see the upcoming guest list and submit questions ahead of the podcast for the guest, then you need to become a subscriber at patreon.com/HK podcasts or hughkier.substack.com. Or instead of remembering all that, look in the blurb of this episode and the details will be in there. This episode, this icebreaker will roll straight into a full podcast with Tina. So as soon as this short one's finished, hang on for the next full podcast about all sorts of things: longevity, health and well-being, and everything that entails that Tina is involved with. So, Tina, welcome to H Hour.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Can you pull that mic in for me? I forgot
Is
that
that better?
Right in, right.
Oh, like right in.
Sorry.
Yeah?
Further in, further in, further in. Good. Should have done that beforehand. Okay, Tina. Question number one from the patrons. This is from a patron called Coke. I did warn you before we started about these questions.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh boy, which one is it?
We're straight in there with this happy question from
Yeah.
Coke. Would it be better, given all the suffering that the human race has and will endure, if life had never started?
Well, that's an interesting perspective and an interesting question. Well, unfortunately, the answer you're getting is from someone who's always an eternal optimist. So I tend to see the rosier side of life and see the glass half full rather than half empty. So my perspective on this is that I think if you have the chance to be alive, why not make the best use of it while you're here on this planet? And I guess that's the quest that most of us humans are on for our entire life, is try and work out, like, why are we here and how to make it last in a way that's actually positive rather than negative
Oh my
as much
God.
as possible.
It boggles my mind. I quite regularly end up my mind going to the is time infinite? Has there always been something? Will there always be something? Has there ever been nothing? What does all that mean? And I'll do that for a few minutes, and I'll go, just don't go. Don't. That's how people go mad. Don't go down that road.
It's part of most humans and people, I mean, that's part of the human existence, sort of working out this question, like, what is life all about and why are we here? So, but there is some very interesting evidence coming out that does show that if you are more optimistic, you tend to live longer. So there's something in that. There's actually something that I just heard about this morning, actually, on the radio about, we've all heard of chronological age. I'm very involved in biological age and how we can actually reduce our biological age below our chronological age. But there's also something called subjective age, like, how do you feel? How young do you feel? And apparently, for those people who think of themselves as younger, they tend to live a longer, healthier life just because of their attitude and their mindset. So I think mindset is actually one of the most underrated aspects of how do you actually achieve a good, long, healthy, happy life. And that's all to do with our psychological state, our state of mind, our emotional state, all those sorts of things, which are getting much more attention now. And I'm interested in the science behind that. So it's a very interesting question. I think, there are people like Brian Johnson, who many people have heard about because he's been very active in the media about his quest for longevity. And he's also a millionaire and spends quite a lot of money, doing all this sort of stuff on himself. But he is basically running a campaign called Don't Die. He wants to live forever. And so there are people like that who are really challenging the status quo of how we see life and why do we need to end it. So there are plenty of people around who, quite the reverse, want to extend their life for as long as possible, even though they haven't had such easy lives themselves. So it's quite interesting. We are all very, very different in how we see this eternal question.
When you were talking, I was thinking there's a bunch of these points I want to come on to and ask questions that we're going to do on the podcast. Okay, question number two. Again from Coke. When have you been your least and most happiest?
Ooh, that's interesting. So I would say I was least happiest probably in my early 20s, and I'm most happy now, actually. And I think, and the reasons for that, I think it's actually not it's not it's not an uncommon thing, actually, to say, when you look at your life, and especially for someone like myself who's 61, you look back, and actually the 20s.
61?
Yes, I'm 61.
Really?
Yes.
I would not have thought that. Goodness
Well,
me. You're looking good for 61.
happiness is part
Congratulations.
of happiness is a huge part of keeping young and looking young and actually being young. And I have a whole story around that, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But yeah, I think if you're happy, that is probably one of the most important things that will keep you going because you tend to be more motivated. It's all sort of a self fulfilling thing, right? So I think and actually and we'll also come to this. I spend a lot of time with young people now because I do all this raving, which is part of my joys of living a healthy long life, which is a recently discovered thing, by the way. But I spend a lot of time with young people. And of course, I've got three sons who are in their mid 20s. One's 23, one's 25, and one's about to turn 28. And I can see and I look back when I speak to people and also my own sons, the 20s are a time when, you probably have your most anxieties because you're trying to work out who you are. You're not quite sure what you want, what you're supposed to be doing. And especially in this day and age of social media, we're all comparing ourselves endlessly to our peers and not thinking we're ever good enough. And of course, you've got low self-esteem, lack of self-confidence that goes hand in hand with that. So I think, it's not surprising that actually the 20s are often the most difficult times for a lot of people, and it certainly was for myself. And there are many, many reasons why I'm the happiest I've ever been now. It's very much connected with finding, I guess, more meaning and purpose in my life, which again is part of this human condition. We're all searching for those answers about what makes a life worth living. A lot of people we tend to forget that question. There's, and especially in my world of longevity, it's always about how do you live longer. What are the things, the quick fix solutions to help you live longer? And there's a lot of stuff being explored there, and a lot of science and technology, etc. But what is a life worth living? I think is the bigger and much more important question because that needs to tap into our internal motivations as people. What drives us to want to keep going? You've probably heard many stories about people who may have cancer or some terrible disease that they're suffering from, but they hang on until they have done their bit. Then they let go. They may have a wedding to go to, or these are the things that So it's amazing the power of the mind on this, and the things that you feel you need to achieve in your life, which will help you keep going.
You have the reverse as well, don't you, where there are people who don't have much meaning or don't seem to have much meaning in life or motivation. They have a situation like that or a near death experience,
Yeah,
and then they come out the other side and all of a sudden
bang.
reinvigorated, more motivated than they've ever been before.
Yeah, yeah,
I think
yeah.
I think maybe because they 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 didn't understand what meaning should be and what the reasons for the existence should be and what should be the
Sure.
motivation, right?
Yeah,
We'll
absolutely.
definitely come on to that in the
Yep.
podcast, definitely. Okay, question number three.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on euthanasia and assisted suicide?
Oh, that's a complicated one, and I can see both sides. And of course, there's been so much debate as it's been going through, discussion in Parliament, etc. I mean, I think there should be such a thing as a good death. I think, I'm not afraid of dying, and there are many reasons why I've come to that realization. My own father was afraid of death for a very long time until he reconciled himself to the whole idea that, when he's going to go, he's going to go. I see it from a scientific perspective around, and this is my science hat. The molecules of my body will be reabsorbed, in the universe, and will find their home somewhere else. And in that sense, maybe reincarnation or something like that. There's some spirit that is there, I think, and it's not a god for me, but it's something there that at the moment science can't quite explain, but maybe one day we will. That somehow our spirits are recycled, and certainly our molecules are, and whether there's an energy force behind that. So I'm very interested in all that sort of stuff from a scientific perspective. But I think on the euthanasia argument, I mean, for myself, I would like to feel that I can almost decide when I die and let go. Like I would not want to end up in a hospital being kept alive against my will. And I think there's a real tension here with the Hippocratic Oath of doctors. That is their job, to keep you alive. And I think the tension there is that, of course, we now have the technology to keep us alive for much longer periods of time. And of course, we have the even worse situation where many of us, because of our poor health, and because we're aging for a longer, we're getting older and being kept alive longer and longer through all the treatments and medicines and so forth that we have. And because we have such a lifestyle of convenience now, where actually a lot of us are living longer with lots of chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, of course, and that, of course, is very heavily influenced by our habits of eating, with the obesity epidemic, and all those sorts of things, which I'm sure we'll come on to, because that's my world of how do we actually, this healthy longevity gig that I'm very involved in. There are too many people living longer with many, many chronic diseases, which of course detract from the quality of their life. Then they end up in hospital. 15% of NHS resources go on the last 2 weeks of life in
What
hospital.
percentage?
It's about 15%.
15.
These that Yeah, which is, most people don't want to be there anyway. So it's sort of like there's something fundamentally wrong. So I think there's a whole debate. There's the kind of Hippocratic oath, the fact that we're living longer in these with terrible, diseases, being kept alive, not necessarily in a good way. So I think there is an argument for euthanasia. I mean, I think if I was able, and if I had my wits about me, and I think there's this whole question of being mentally sound. I think that's a lot of where the debate is. When one has to be mentally sound, not one of the, vulnerable, so you can't make decisions on your own behalf. I think if I had the resources and the means and the support around me of my family, my husband and my sons and my family, I'd kind of like to feel I could just press the button when I felt ready to go, because most of the time that usually happens when people are finally ready to go, they go. But I think it could be in a much nicer way than it seems to be happening at the moment.
Yeah, you raised some interesting points there. I'd not considered before actually on that subject. The advance of medicine, people living longer with worse conditions than before they would have died. But yeah, I think what I don't like about it is the the seemingly low thresholds at which
Mm.
euthanasia is being advised,
Yeah,
can
fair
be
enough.
advised
Yeah,
or taken,
yeah.
especially where you're talking about mental health conditions.
See, that's where it gets very complicated. And that's where you do need the law to be very, very, very precise and on the side of those, who may not be as well equipped, as others to make those sort of decisions. So I think it's an important debate to be had. But I
Mm,
think yeah, I mean, it's come at a time when the tensions are so strong that we just have to have this debate. So
yeah. Okay, last question in the icebreakers. Are there any people or organizations you wouldn't work with? For example, Donald Trump. For example, the Taliban.
um, well, I so I have a fairly high ethical radar, and I'm very principled in the way that I carry out my own professional work and in my personal life. It's sort of like, treat others like you would want to be treated yourselves. I mean, that's very much how I guide myself in everything that I do professionally and personally. So I think, I always like to see the other perspective before I make a final judgment. And I think we have to accept that different cultures, different religions, different areas around the world, they have a very, very different perspective on a lot of things, and it's very easy to judge. So I think you have to be very, very careful when you make your judgments. I mean, I uh, I have fairly well developed political beliefs, and obviously I would I would tend to align myself with political organizations that are, left of center, for example. Although there are many more right of center ways of thinking that I actually personally agree with. I mean, I do believe in the power of the individual, which is very kind of, I guess, considered a right wing type of approach, but I don't see it in that way. So I think we have to also be very, very careful about the labels that we use for things, because I think we do tend to use a lot of labels, which then can be misconstrued and put out of context. I personally think we need to reduce the number of labels that we use in society, and I think really stick to the, what makes us human. Because I think what I find in my work more and more is that there's a huge. I think we are all bound by a very common core of which is the basic human element, humanity. We are all humans, and actually, I rarely find, and all the people that I meet, even if I disagree with their points of view, there is an element of real human goodness in everybody. You can find it. So so yeah, I mean, even Donald Trump, there are certain things that he has said, and I think there's an element of truth with all the nonsense that he comes out with, occasionally, that you have to listen to and you have to respect. And there are an awful lot of people who do believe in what he's doing. So you have to try and understand, well, where is he coming from, and why is it that he's tapping into the core belief systems of a lot of people. So that's what you have to try and understand.
Yeah, it's a really important point you made about the labels. I hate if and when I get labeled or categorized as something by someone else. I don't see myself as some people would categorize me as right of center.
Yeah,
I'm sure some people would categorize me as far right. I'm sure some people would categorize me as left of center
yeah,
because depending on what they've heard me say or see me do, and they make a judgment, and then you get labeled. And the
yeah.
thing is, I think with people, will people who don't have that awareness of the
Mm,
risks of the problems of labeling, they end up getting labeled. They see it as a they see it as a their connection into a part of a tribe, and then they think there's expectations on them to behave
hmm.
in a certain way.
Sure,
And all of a sudden the label is driving the behaviors
sure.
as opposed to their own actual beliefs and opinions driving how they
Yeah,
behave. You see it all the
yeah,
time, and you see it on both sides of, I'm going to use labels now, left and right,
sure.
all the time.
Well, and we see how grayed and blurred the areas are between left wing ideology and right wing ideology. They're often quite similar, aren't they, at the extremes? Which is the interesting thing. That's the
Yeah.
paradox. So I think so. I guess my personal way that I guide myself and my own code of conduct in life is don't jump to make any assumptions about anybody until you really try and understand what is driving their behavior. So, and I think actually those who do jump and make their judgments and their decisions on people very, very quickly are probably actually pretty biased individuals
The
themselves.
problem is, though, Tina, the problem is that that behavior
Mm,
is encouraged
yeah.
by media
Yeah. No, that's
and
true.
by government. It's
Sure.
very useful for people who
Yeah.
boxed in like that. And
Yeah.
then the other thing that it does is with the labels, we're nearly done yet. We're not going to go down the political conversation yet. But
Sure.
the other thing that labels does is, you box yourself into being a label. Then let's say it's left.
Yeah.
Let's say you're a progressive or whatever you want to call yourself, and you're on that side of the fence. And then you end up in a trap quite often where every single thing Donald Trump does,
Hmm.
for example, is bad. He can never possibly do or say anything that's good, which
Mm,
is inherently incorrect,
of
right?
course. Yes.
But you don't see that. And the
Yeah.
same on the flip side. It just
Yeah.
skews everything. Yes, labels are bad. I totally agree. That was the last question. So you would vote with Donald Trump. Got it. No, I'm joking. And the Taliban. I got it. No, great. Okay. End of the icebreaker. This, if you're listening on your podcast app, this is going to roll straight into the full podcast with Tina, where we will be talking about longevity. We will not be talking about labels. Or maybe we'll be talking about labels, but in context. And that is